Perhaps the biggest A Song of Ice and Fire mystery is finally given screen time. Alarm bells went off in my head when the first part of the previously on was Robert looking at Lyanna's statue, and I bet a lot of you felt the same. Digging deep in these show-to-book comparisons has enlightened us in new ways. It's pretty hard to reread a subtle book like Feast for Crows or any of the Song of Ice and Fire books and not learn something new. That's a piece of hidden value that we get out of looking for comparisons between show-to-book. Now, who knew that studying the show so closely would lead to better understanding of the books? That sounds like an anathema to some book purists, I'm sure. Well, but here we are. Based on the number of emails we're receiving and comments posted to our show-only review episode and from looking around at other social media like Twitter, at Westeros History, for those who haven't followed us there, and Facebook, at History of Westeros, this is the most talked about episode in quite a while. A lot of people are upset, a lot of people are thrilled, and many are in between. Sometimes, sometimes we love certain plots and changes, and sometimes not so much.
Yeah, it's a good place to remind you that we do read all of your comments and emails. We don't always respond, though, because, well, we're really busy. It's a really busy time of the year for us. With the show, there's other issues as well, of real-life stuff always, but we do read them all and try to incorporate them into our show.
Yeah, and to be clear, we are still working on regular non-TV episodes. Ashaya and I expect to record one such within the next 4 to 5 days, which would put the release about 2 weeks out, if all goes well. I've learned not to make promises on that anymore. We occasionally run into problems and things change, we get new information, so yes. Our release schedule is always a to-be-announced type of thing, but we try to be as consistent as possible given those limitations.
Yeah, so all that said, hello and welcome to another episode of History of Westeros podcast dedicated to George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire book series, as well as HBO's Game of Thrones. Today's episode is, of course, focused on the TV show, but as it relates to the book specifically. And so there are spoilers for all books, no spoilers for the Winds of Winter, right?
Yeah, there's not really any Winds of Winter spoilers. There's some vague
allusion.
References to Winds of Winter, but very, very mild.
Yeah.
And, of course, I'm glad to have you back, Ashaya. You know, you've been in and out with our episodes lately. You've got a busy schedule outside of the show, and we appreciate you being here. Lady Gwen from Radio Westeros, good to have you back as well.
Good to be back with you guys.
And your partner in crime, Yoke Boy, there in England. Good to have you back as well.
Hi, yeah, I'm really glad to be back doing some more TV show studying with you guys. Looking forward to it.
Right on. And you guys just put out a Barristan episode, didn't you?
Yes,
yeah, we did.
How appropriate was that timing?
Pretty good. And yeah, if you need to dry your Barristan tears, then come and have a book look at Barristan with us, where he is still alive.
Yes, that's the wonderful thing about the show-to-book split, is even though he's dead on the show, well, he's still alive in the books, and we don't have to be sure he's going to die anytime soon in the books just because he died in the show. That's not a parallel that absolutely has to happen.
No.
So it might. So we're all a little worried, I'm sure. But also thanks to Watchers on the Wall for adding us to their site. The link there has helped us get a few more views. Make sure you guys send them your thanks for adding us to that, because it helps us get more coverage, and that helps us grow and make more episodes. That's very important. So thanks to Watchers on the Wall, and thanks to you guys for helping us tell them that we think that we're appreciative for that. So getting a better handle, like I said, we're getting a better handle, a better hander on what the show does well versus the books. Showrunners have failed to capture the essence of a lot of the characters and some key moments, but they've also done a good job compressing and combining plots, combining characters, reusing characters rather than bringing in new ones, which is kind of a necessity for a TV show. There's too many real-world considerations like hiring new actors and all these other things that don't impact the book writing process at all. So we have to give them some leeway for some of the changes they make, but that doesn't mean we have to agree with all the changes either. So we'll as usual, we'll give credit where credit's due, criticize where we think criticism is deserved. We won't be overly negative, but we will not shy from saying negative things. Throughout this episode, the four of us will have ample opportunity to be more specific with what we liked and didn't like. Real quick, does anyone know of examples of a show that has done a better job than the books? I'm not counting Game of Thrones, of course. I don't think a lot of people think the show is better than the books. I'm sure there's a few people that think that, but I'm looking for something outside of Game of Thrones. Does anyone have any examples of that?
That's interesting. I haven't.
I don't
thought
think
about
any
that.
of us do.
Maybe people who like True Blood or Walking Dead would feel something
Right.
about that.
Yeah, so if you guys have any suggestions there, throw them our way. That'd be interesting. I just like to hear that kind of thing, just for my own curiosity. Now, with the nature of television giving rotating directors and writers, creating sub-themes and other unique qualities that are encapsulated within a single hour, themes of exposition, backstory, and action with parallel dialogue like we had in this episode, those things really stand out because they're captured all within an hour. It's a theme. It's written by a specific writer with individual directors, rather than George R. R. Martin's magnum opus. So we see these different qualities that each episode has. Lady Gwen, you noticed a few things in particular about this episode.
Yeah, this episode I found had really excellent pacing overall. I liked the way it was organized. The characters, the sequence, and of course, it had some very exciting content.
Yeah, it really did.
They did a great job here. This one.
So, as history fans, the book contained references to some of the biggest major historical events in A Song of Ice and Fire history: the Tourney of Harrenhal, Robert's Rebellion, Rhaegar and Lyanna's relationship, and the Faith Militant. A couple quick notes before we start. We have a lot to cover, so we're going to go quickly here. Thanks in particular to Yoke Boy and Ashaya, who are both a little under the weather, but I know you guys did not want to miss out on the episode where we discuss winklepickers.
I've had worse. I'll get through it.
So thanks for soldiering brilliantly through this, everybody. We'll explain what the hell a winklepicker is. Stay tuned. I know you're very curious. If you already know what a winklepicker is, then give yourself 5 gold stars, or a 7-pointed star.
Maybe it's just a British thing. We'll have to see.
Yeah, it does sound kind of British, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, quick announcement. Hymn for Spring, the Tower of the Hand book featuring myself and Ashaya, as well as Jeff Hartline, Stefan Sasa, Stephen Atwell, Amin Javadi, Mark Kleinheitz, Johnny from Tower of the Hand. I maybe forgot somebody. I'm doing that from memory. But a lot of great essayists. That book is available via pre-order through our website, historyofwesteros.com. It comes out on the 8th, so that's very soon, right around the corner. Hope you guys check that out. Our essay is on the Curse of Harren the Black, and it's a lot of fun, if I do say so myself. Now, our questions policy. We have been getting a lot of questions. We asked you guys to send us questions, and the response has been excellent. Sometimes we do not answer your questions because your question is more appropriate for a plot line that wasn't in this particular episode. For example, anything to do with Arya, anything to do with Brienne, anything to do with the Boltons for the most part, those questions will be answered in the next episode, assuming all those characters actually appear in the next episode.
And I just want to thank you all for posting spoilers on our YouTube comments. I love it so much.
Yeah, that was a couple people gave us some things we didn't want to know.
Yes.
Anyway.
Thankfully, not until after we had actually watched the episode. But,
So, one thing to do if you guys are trying to send us questions, I have a couple suggestions for how you might think about it to get improve your chances of getting a question that we actually answer here on the show. Look for cut plot lines and consider how they could be fit in some other way. We're seeing a lot of plots that are very similar to plots in the book, but quite different in some fundamental way, either the way they're executed or they're executed by a completely different character, but it's still the essence of that plot. So that's something to look for. Another thing is when something appears very different, look for subtle parallels. Sometimes within these great differences there are some things that are very similar. They kind of sneak these hidden details in there. So an example from Wisdom James of the Los Alamos Alchemists Guild. Great name there. He suggests the possibility that Gendry will be used as a parallel to Phagon / Aegon VI, whichever your preferred name for him is.
/ Young Griff.
/ Young Griff, right. So that would be really interesting. Instead of a different Targaryen claimant, we have a different Baratheon claimant coming out of the woodwork. I'm not sure how that could happen, but I really like the idea. That's exactly the type of thinking we're looking for. And I think a lot of you guys out there, having heard that suggestion, your head is spinning a little bit, wondering how that could come to play. Right now, Gendry's still rowing. I don't know what we'll do about that. And an example that we came up with on our own, Balon Greyjoy. Why is he still alive? Well, I think that's because the Faceless Men are responsible for his death in the books, almost certainly. However, we're not so sure about that yet in the show, but if they're going to go that same route and kill him off by a faceless man, well, they wouldn't want to do that back in season 3 or even season 4 when the faceless men have hardly been introduced or introduced at all. So now that we have the faceless men back or explained, the door is open for Balon to die. So we might see that happen.
I do think that they could have, since they have Jaken's face already in it, playing devil's advocate, that they could have just had Jaken kill him and show up, and then they could have explained it after the fact, right? And people would be like, "Whoa, why is Jaken the God there killing Balon Greyjoy?" But I am curious whether it would be Arya witnessing the contract, whether she's witnessing.
That would be really cool.
Get it, or is she seeing it given to like the Waif character? Or is she seeing it? Maybe a different faceless man. Is Arya gonna go herself next season? No.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I wonder, they've also introduced the kind of this faceless man calling card. They call themselves No One. So maybe that someone will say, "Hey, I'm No One."
Yeah.
Balon will be like, "Who are you?" And he says, "No One," and that gives it away that it's the faceless man. But there is the chance that the Greyjoy plot gets cut entirely. That's a reality we have to accept. Ron Snow and others have pointed out the numerical similarity. Dario mentions that he captured 93 Myronese ships. And, well, Victarion in the Iron Fleet, when he sails for Slaver's Bay, he had 93 ships. So, but that could just mean that the Greyjoys aren't the ships that bring Daenerys over. That doesn't mean that some of their other parts of the plotline couldn't be included. But the Iron Islands are not one of the 5 locations in this episode, and Gendry is, again, still rowing. So we're in wait-and-see mode on that. Predictions are fun to make, but let's tackle this episode because there is a lot to cover. We have the locations we do have: King's Landing, Dorne, the Wall, the Crypts of Winterfell, and Essos. We have R+L=J, we have Grayscale, we have Tragedy, and we have foreshadowing of even more. So along the lines of Balon and the Faceless Men idea, we also have theories. And there's a lot to cover today. As I said, I hope we can get it all in this 2 hours. So what are we waiting for? We're already about 12 minutes in or so. Let's go. King's Landing, a small council. Things are looking ominous for Grand Maester Pycelle, aren't they, Jen?
Yes, they are. Definitely, the small council grows smaller. I think that's what Pycelle said in that scene. That puts us in mind of something we mentioned last episode, how the small council is indeed very small in the opening pages of The Winds of Winter, with Varys and Kevin Dead and Herr Swift off in Bravos. So, ominous looking.
Yeah, and there's always, as usual, there's always potential for some slight tweaks to what we're expecting from the books. We're expecting Pycelle to die. I think that seems like a thing that will be carried over. I don't see any reason for them to need to keep him around. I think a lot of people will cheer for his death because they made him not to be so creepy in the show. He's not that he isn't creepy in the books too, but they really took it to another level in the show.
Actually, I think we didn't talk about this last week. We just thought about it recently. This is a good point when we're talking about Pycelle. I was talking to Aziz about it, and he was talking about how Cersei was so contemptuous of Pycelle and why she was so contemptuous exactly. And I pointed out to him, and I thought maybe some viewers maybe didn't notice this, that he's a creepy guy. She specifically says that she would not let Pycelle touch her, and Pycelle takes advantage of young women, and we've seen him doing that.
Specifically,
and
yeah.
we've seen Cersei see Pycelle accosting her ladies. And so I think Cersei just thinks that he's just a scumbag, predator.
He needs to go. He needs to die. It's just a matter of who's going to do it. And will Kevin also be killed? That's in question because the show has introduced him as a character, and so far he's following basically along the same lines. He left King's Landing like he did in the books. Maybe he'll come back. Maybe he won't. They might want to keep things simple. Watching her, Jack Jervis suggests, what if Varys kills Littlefinger instead? And if maybe we've suggested maybe Littlefinger does some of the killings that Varys does in the books, but what if Varys is the one doing the killings and he kills Littlefinger?
Yeah.
That's a wow moment. If that happens, I'll be truly shocked. Only less so because the idea is planted in my head first. But still, I'd be shocked even having heard that. Now, Lady Gwyn, what about Mace Tyrell?
Well, Mace, before he gets sent on his mission, made an offer to assume the crown debt, which I think is not something he did in the books. Certainly gave lots of food. I don't think he specifically, was offered to take over the Iron Bank debt. But someone else did. Tywin assumed crown debt for not 1 but 2 kings during his time as Hand.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Now, Trent Michael and Billy Davis III, Watchers galore, extraordinaire, sorry. They had a conversation on our YouTube channel, and one particularly cool thing came out of it. Roger Ashton Griffiths, who is the actor who plays Mace Tyrell, apparently he is been quoted as saying his character is more cunning than he seems. So he might be in for a little surprise, maybe.
Yeah, we haven't seen any evidence of that other than his, very clever jokes in this episode. But if it's true, we might just be in for a surprise. He might just like to think the best of Mace.
Yeah, maybe he's just playing up his own character there.
Yeah, maybe.
But that would be, I like the idea, I like planting the seed of that Mace Tyrell is more than he seems. That's fun to think about. So now we have Sir Meryn Trant going with him to Braavos, and that sets up Arya, doesn't it? We'll have to see how that's played out. I expect Arya will maybe cross a name off her list. But there's more to it than just the more straightforward angle of Arya getting a chance at revenge, isn't there, Yoke Boy?
Yeah, one thing I noticed is that Cersei is oblivious. She doesn't realize that she's giving away an experienced Kingsguard. In the situation that she's in, this is going to make herself even more vulnerable, and the theme of her bringing her own downfall might be coming into play there. And one of your watchers called Simon Donnelly points out that if Meryn dies, presumably at Arya's hands, this could create a very nice spot in the Kingsguard for one Sir Robert Strong.
Right. In the books, the spot for Robert Strong is opened up by the death of Sir Aerys Oakheart in Dorne. So we're going to have a Kingsguard, the parallel of a Kingsguard dying in a foreign location. Dorne isn't foreign, obviously, but it is exotic, maybe. It's far away from King's Landing. And it'll be interesting to see how Mace Tyrell reacts to his death. Just he's on this trip, and all of a sudden his Kingsguard presumably just vanishes.
Just vanishes, is what you assume.
Like, he went AWOL. That's strange.
Yeah, that must be weird. Mace would try to rationalize it some way like that. He wouldn't just think he was killed. I don't know what Mace is going to think.
Yeah.
Now, and Watcher Grant Dickerson wonders if Meryn will die acting out Sirio's death, kind of the way Wrath of Sweetling has his go down.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see if there's any kind of additional parallels there. I hope so.
Oh, yeah.
Now, let's talk about Cersei and the High Sparrow. A funny note, our good Twitter buddy, Ian Trone, who is the manager of all the podcasts, not literally, he keeps track of all the different Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire podcasts, and that is a lot of work because there are so many out there. But he pointed out something really neat, and that is, in the books, the term High Sparrow is coined by Moon Boy. No joke. That might be why the High Sparrow in the show is making fun of his own title, saying, King Turtle, all that. That's been a sly reference to Moon Boy. So, Lady Gwyn, you noticed something interesting at the beginning of this conversation where the camera starts.
It starts with a close-up of a scroll, and the scroll has a Mockingbird sigil on it. And, of course, we looked at the screenshot, and it says something about my establishment, and it's signed Peter Baelish. So remember in the last episode, the High Septon was seized from Littlefinger's establishment, and of course Oliver was squawking, "This is Lord Peter Baelish's establishment." And that was before Cersei sent the original message to Littlefinger. So I wondered if this is some way connected. The only thing I could think of. It's not to take away at all from this idea that Littlefinger is coming to be the Hand, because I put pretty good odds on that at this point. But
yeah, it seems like some sort of, maybe Littlefinger has a lot of dirt on different people by being a brothel owner. Maybe there's some relation to that. Oliver, of course, would be at the center of that. More on Oliver a bit later.
What was your? Did you have another thought about that? About how they were connected?
No, other than the possibility that it's related to the scene from the last episode. Not really sure.
The previous High Septon's portrayal is similar to Septon Reynard of the Most Devout, who is known by Cersei to frequent the Street of Silks. This is kind of a replay of that same hypocrisy that we're seeing through a different lens, the book through show. Now, it's also very vaguely similar in concept to the idea that sorcery is like a sword without a hilt. We're talking Melisandre says that line, or that line comes up in a few different ways. But Cersei's kind of doing the same thing here. She's working with the faith. Militant is very similar. She's playing with fire or wildfire, in a sense, you could say.
Cersei loves fire.
Does the High Sparrow know already about Robert's murder or sleeping with Lancel? What do you think, Lady Gwyn?
Well, I put pretty good odds on he does. He has these 2 lines delivered to Cersei. May the gods judge them justly, and all men are equal in the eyes of gods. And the way he's looking as he says that just kind of gave us the chills. And then also, of course, there's people in the street calling out bastard and incest to Tommen. So, it's obviously commonly known in the streets. So figure he's got to suspect at least.
I did have one thought about, by the way, going back, I didn't have a chance to say it before, going back to Littlefinger's establishment in that letter. I had a thought that Cersei might have been looking for ways to catch Loras out, and that Littlefinger might have told her that there's some people at my establishment that could further your there's a word further in there as well.
You're right, that is the word.
That could, and so then they get Olivar, who of course is Loras' lover, or they've had sex, and so then they go they go to Littlefinger's brothel, they trash it, we see Olivar, and then they go right to get Loras, and so I'm thinking that they got some sort of proof by going there.
That makes a lot of sense.
Further proof can be found in my establishment.
Yeah, something like that, maybe, although you'd think it was better for Littlefinger to have the Tyrells in power, but chaos is good, I guess.
Yeah, who knows what game he's playing.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
So, in general, the relationship certain characters have with the High Sparrow and with Cersei and apparently with Littlefinger and or Olivar is going to really play out because these secrets are getting spilled, and that's going to blow up for some people. Lancel's relationship with the High Sparrow in general is really interesting, and it's not fully explored yet or shown what kind of connection they have. Surely they have some sort of connection, or will have some sort of connection. But Lancel, of course, has a lot of dirt on Cersei, and perhaps a few other people as well, but mostly on Cersei. There's that very ominous line that's very hypocritical by Cersei where she says that she's referring to Loras, but she talks about how this person supposedly is shielded by gold and privilege.
And I thought it was really funny that the High Sparrow makes me wonder what exactly he's thinking, because he replies that yes, he does need to, he specifically says he, and I feel like that was a cunning choice to make Cersei feel comfortable to not say she.
What do you think about this whole situation?
Well, as I said earlier, this is Cersei bringing about her own downfall, isn't it? It's the pace is picking up with this kind of theme. First, empowering the faith, and then mentioning it was actually Cersei who mentioned, hidden behind privilege, which, as you say, is quite hypocritical. She could be describing herself there. So, yeah, this theme of bringing about her own downfall is something which really comes from the books. I think in the books there's more of a slant on her kind of descent into slight madness, or at least paranoia, I'll say. And again, she does arm the faith militant in the books.
Yeah, and another parallel to Olivar is that we have the Kettleblacks, who have a lot in common with what Olivar is doing, not in terms of the type of character they are, but in terms of what they know and how they're caught up in the middle of people who are more powerful than them, and they're kind of turning into pawns. It looks like Olivar is going to be caught up in some things, and the Kettleblacks got caught up in all kinds of things that ended up in torture and murder and all kinds of awful things. So let's talk about the faith militant themselves, though. They go on the warpath right away. They're destroying all things of vices. We see them down by the docks smashing other religious idols that are not related to the Seven. We see the soldiers, the guards not helping, which is ominous for authority in general, who is taking over. And we see preaching against the brothels, which also happens in the books. It's not as aggressive and bloody as this. We don't have, you know, the faithful storming brothels and killing people like we do in the show, but it's at least somewhat familiar. So, Yolkboy, tell us more about differences between the Faith Militant in the books and show.
Okay, Faith Militant in the books. This is comprised by two factions. One, the Warrior's Sons, and the other called the Poor Fellows. The Warrior's Sons are knights, and it seems like they're quite privileged people who've actually given up their assets and titles. They're nicknamed Swords, and Lancel Lannister is one of them. And essentially, they're knights who swear to the High Septon instead of swearing to a lord, really. And the Poor Fellows, who have united with the Warrior's Sons, they are called Stars, and really they're just commoners that have kind of taken on this religious streak and kind of armed themselves with... It's a bit like the pitchfork kind of thing. They've armed themselves with whatever the heck they can arm themselves with, because, you know, this is kind of rabble militia. And the Faith Militant are these composed of these two orders.
Yes.
So, as part of the deal with the Faith, when they were disarmed about 250 years ago, the Crown said it would protect the faithful. So they haven't been living up to that, not at all. The Faith, not only have the faithful been getting killed and starved, just like a lot of other areas in Westeros. During the War of the Five Kings, this protection was, not only did it fall off, if it ever was really strong, but it flipped in a lot of ways. Tywin specifically ordered the Mountain and Sir Amory Lorch and the Bloody Mummers to go off and do their worst, which included sacking several septs. In the books, we see this on the pages directly in front of us. We don't just hear about it. Lots of septs and septons and septas and Silent Sisters have really awful things done to them. And the Crown is doing the opposite of his duty in this case. It's almost no wonder that the Faith isn't more aggressive towards House Lannister, but I guess a lot of this is because they're not aware of who was giving out the orders. So we do also see it's kind of funny to think about Tywin, who supposedly managed his family so well. He just creates this problem for them. Of course, on the other hand, he would never have made the mistake that Cersei made by letting them rearm. That was a giant blunder. Now, in the books, we also see a lot of seven-pointed stars. We don't see them carved into people's heads so much. That's a small show change there, apparently. We do have one example of someone painting a star on their head, and we do have examples throughout history and in the modern series of people carving the seven-pointed star in their chest, and there's reference to that people carving it into their flesh, which could mean anywhere, really. So lots of fanaticism in the Faith there. Here's a quote. The seven-pointed star went everywhere the Andals went, borne before them on shields and banners, embroidered on their surcoats, sometimes incised into their very flesh. And Sir Robert Strong himself is adorned in 7 ornaments, or in ornaments of the 7, not number 7 ornamants. The plumes on his helmet are matched to the 7 colors of the 7 gods, and his cloak is fastened by 2 seven-pointed stars. So a little homage to the faithful there. Let's talk about Loras and his arrest. So this is a direct strike at Marjorie, if not Haas Tyrell in general. In the books, she asks Qyburn about prophecy and his thoughts on it in general, and he tells her she already knows what needs to be done, which is to kill Marjorie. It's like that's the only way you can beat a prophecy, is to do something like this.
Yeah, and I found it strange that we were shown the Valancourt in the first episode of the series, but since then we haven't kind of revisited it, and we don't really get a strong sense that it's affecting Cersei's actions. Yeah. So I kind of think they're missing the punch on the Valancourt at the moment. I hope they, have Cersei talking about her experience and really show that it gripped her,
Yeah, that's a good point, and we wonder if, well, rather, I've been pointing it out. We've been pointing it out in the show in our reviews that that's something to keep in mind. That why Cersei is acting a little bit the way she is because of the Nagy the Frog prophecy. But you're right. The show should probably remind people of that. On the other hand, I guess maybe people are just used to Cersei doing crazy things, and that it just maybe they just feel like that fits. Now, one thing I saw people reacting to was Loras's taking. Some people thought maybe it went down a little too easily. At first, I thought the same thing, but then I rewatched it. I rewatched it several times, and it's clear to me that now that Loras not only had put down his sword, but it was a tourney sword, and he didn't see them coming, and he would also not be worried about anything bad happening to him. He's kind of an arrogant guy, and he's sitting in the Red Keep where his sister is queen. Why would he be worried? He probably wasn't even aware that the Faith Militant were a thing. He's like, who are these guys? He might have even recognized Lancel, and that might have slowed him down. So I would agree that if he had a chance to fight, he could have done some serious damage, but he was just so surprised. So let's see. We have another, this list takes us to a short section we'll call the powerlessness of Tommen. And he kind of gets pulled in a lot of directions. He doesn't know what to do. He stands up to his mother a little bit, but kind of gets rebuffed a little bit because she's kind of claims that she's powerless too. Now, I think this is a parallel to something going on in The Feast for Crows. An interesting quote referencing our favorite book, Cat, Sir Pounce. Lady Gwen, why don't you show this to us here?
Yeah, I'll read the Sir Pounce quote. Sir Pounce caught a mouse, he told her, but Lady Whiskers stole it from him. I was never so sweet and innocent, Cersei thought. How can he ever hope to rule this cruel realm? The mother in her wanted only to protect him. The queen in her knew he must grow harder, or the Iron Throne was certain to devour him. Sir Pounce must learn to defend his rights, she told him. In this world, the weak are always the victims of the strong.
So a running question we have is Tommen weak? Is he lacking in cunning, or is it a little of both? I mean, he's young, he's inexperienced, but he's definitely naive as well.
Yeah, you know, Cersei doing this to him makes a lot more sense since he's so much older and still kind of like childlike Tommen of the books in a lot of ways, and so he hasn't grown in cunning despite him being older, really.
That's true. This wouldn't even be an option in the books for her to put the 10-year-old to face down the High Sparrow.
Yeah, she wouldn't have done that to her little 10-year-old boy, but to her married, you know, however old, 16-year-old son.
Already having sex.
Yeah, already having sex. Yeah, I did feel really bad for Tommen in that scene, though. He's really looked helpless.
Yeah. He really did. The actor's doing a good job.
Yeah,
he has the king. He needs to walk around with his crown on. I'll give him a little more authority.
Yeah.
So then Marjorie leaves. I guess that adds to Tommen's woes. But it's foreshadowing, perhaps, the return of Olenna, the Queen of Thorns, which we're excited for. She's always great on screen. Mm-hmm. And with Mace gone and Loras in captivity, Marjorie might be fearing for her own safety a little bit here. This might not just be about, well, she says, I need to be with my family. But the reason she might not need to be with her family isn't just to, you know, make sure she continues to have sway over Tommen, but she might be a little worried for herself. What's coming next? If Loras is seized, maybe she's next.
Yeah.
If I were her, I might worry about the same things.
Yeah. I think it's also just she's got to teach Tommen as well, and maybe this is. I think Marjorie is. I think she is thinking of that as well when she's decided to leave him. I don't think. I think she was thinking that was the right play.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think she thought it was the right play, and for several reasons, and one of those was the
keep
impact.
Keep her power.
Tommen,
I mean, she can't show Tommen that if he doesn't do what she wants, she'll just stay with him and do what he wants. She has to show him that it hurt her and that he needs to do it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, so let's move on to Dorne. Dorne was pretty interesting. Maybe some aspects of it weren't so great. Some aspects were kind of cool, and a lot we just have to wait and see because we're still pretty early in the game here. On the ship, this was very cool. We get to see Tarth as we're passing by. And Yolkboy, you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's just seeing stuff. I really like the fact that they had that. It was a nice surprise. And of course, it's a reminder to Jamie of Brienne. And you see that kind of look in his eyes. And yeah, we were reminded that she still means something to him on some level. You know, it's up to the viewers to decide kind of what level that is.
Yeah.
But the Sapphire Isles also reminds him of his last adventure. And here he is, kind of setting sail on another one. You know, his last one, he kind of got his hand cut off, and it was a very strange kind of journey. And here he is going for adventure number 2 of the series.
What limb will he lose this time? So, and later on, when Jamie and Bronn are discussing how would you like to die, Jamie mentions that he would prefer to die in the arms of the woman he loves. Doesn't say who that is, and maybe that'll be a certain woman from Tarth. Now, a lot more on Brienne, rather, can be found on Radio Westeros' coverage of Brienne, which is a really excellent episode.
Thank you.
How about Jaime's determination? How about determining, rather, how his arc will lead based on what happens to him in his Riverlands arc? If there are any parallels to be drawn, we'd like to try to get at them. Lady Gwyn, you have some thoughts on that?
Well, you know, I'm not sure about parallels yet, but you know, the one thing that struck me is he was really determined here. You know, he kept saying it has to be me. And in the Riverlands, he was really determined to do the right thing. You know, he makes a big show about being Tywin's son, but he continually turns to advice from his other father figures, Arthur Dayne and Sumner Craycall, Arthur Dayne in particular, who obviously is someone who did the right thing. And that Riverlands arc is very much about vows he made to Catelyn and Brienne, so it'd be interesting to see where they take that part of it here. Now,
we also get 2 notices that Bronn is aware of the incest, like a lot of people are by now, but of course it's one of those things that even if you know the secret, there's not necessarily a lot you can do with it. But I don't think that's going to end up mattering, but it is interesting to see that Bronn knows. Jaime also points out how he wants to kill Tyrion now, though Tyrion still doesn't hate Jaime. In the books, they both are kind of poised to hate each other. They may not need to come up with a reason for Tyrion to be mad with Jaime, or maybe they'll find some other way to spin that. I think there may have been a bit of an inside joke there. We have Jaime saying, Bronn asking for Tyrion to send him his regards, and Jaime says, I'd split him in 2, then I'd send him my regards. And now we know that Jaime lost his regards line because Roose says the Lannisters send you regards at the Red Wedding, so a lot of people complained about that, and this could be a little nod to that. I couldn't help notice that line being so similar. Now, what about the other parallel here? Yolkboy, you noticed something with regards to Tyrion.
Well, it's just the obvious thing that we see Jaime and Tyrion both on boats, and I noted that Cersei's on a sinking ship, so all the Lannister siblings, and there is a nod to Tyrion's line. You know, the line that Bronn says about how he wants to die. In the books, Tyrion's got this famous line: "In my own bed, with a belly full of wine and a maiden's mouth around my cock at the age of 80. So maybe it was Bronn's line was somewhat similar if you kind of compared them. Maybe a little nod.
Bronn's line reminded me of Walder Frey. All his children and his grandchildren squabbling over his fortune.
Right.
I didn't get that. That's true. That's so true. Now, Lady Gwyn, you noticed something about the captain of the ship.
Well, you know, probably everybody noticed that Bronn called that the ship's captain was going to betray them.
Yeah.
Which didn't work out very well for him. But it reminded me very much of the ship's captain who brought Catelyn to King's Landing in A Game of Thrones. His name was Morio Tamitis. I believe he was a Bravosi. But, you know, she had no sooner stepped off that ship than she sold Cat. He sold her out to whoever, Varys or Littlefinger or both. So, you know, just made me a little nod, at least reminding us that you really shouldn't trust in people like that.
Yeah. Now, once we get ashore, we've already gotten, throughout these Bronn and Jaime scenes, we've already gotten lots of hints that Bronn is not going to survive this journey. So he is looking more and more like a very loose parallel to Sir Ares Oakheart. Nothing in terms of
honor.
Yeah, nothing in terms of honor, nothing in terms of
Seduction.
But just a character that's going to Dorne to die. I loved the Jaime catching a sword in his golden hand. That was very unexpected and very funny, and I laughed aloud.
I loved it, especially because I've long since thought about he could do something more useful, I feel like, with his hand.
Right.
Like, he puts on a golden hand, like, attach a shield to your hand, or a sword, or do so. I felt for so long that he should do something with it, and so they had him catch it, and that was awesome.
I was yelling at the screen. I was like, hit him with your hand, hit him. I was hoping he would do something with it. It never occurred to me that he would do that, which is just way cooler than any of our suggestions.
Yeah, it really catches him off guard.
The guy's like, what do I do? They both are surprised by it. So great comic.
I hope we see him do it again.
Yeah, he's like, that's my move now, my patented move. In the book, it's mentioned that the hand is hooked so that he can hold a goblet. You know, it's like, well, this is much better than holding a goblet.
Right.
So let's, of course, the Jaime and Bronn scene. Of course, their purpose is to rescue Myrcella. This is paralleled by the Sand Snakes and Ilaria, who are trying to get to Myrcella first. This scene, unfortunately, was weak. I think that I think all of us agree on that.
Do we all agree?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It seemed the fandom seems to agree on that as well, which is very disappointing. There's a lot of hope for the Sand Snakes. Some of my expectations were already lowered from seeing the stuff in the before, seeing some of the shots.
Previews, cast photos, set photos of the armor. Yeah, I don't know. To me, the scene it felt forced, and I think I hit on part of a lot of where the awkwardness came to me. It came from the introduction of all of them at once. And for Obar to be telling Ilaria, and thus her sisters, this story, whereas originally in the books, Obara and the other two Sand Snakes that we meet are introduced but one by one, each lobbying with Doran, basically, to go to war. And so it just makes a lot of sense to me for that to be their introduction, because they're, like, lobbying. So for her to tell that story just made a lot of sense. And then there was this dichotomy between Doran's wish for peace and Obara's wish for war, and the other Sand Snake's wish for war, which is this just felt flat, whereas the scenes that I'm comparing it to had a lot of depth and a lot of like ambiance to it, with like the oranges falling and just a lot of like little things that they're just lacking.
Yeah, they really are.
What did you think?
Yeah, my very succinct thought is that they now have all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. It's not. They've gone from being this very sort of, very it's subtle, but they're sharp, and now they're just they're a blunt instrument, in my opinion.
Do we all think that they're a bit kind of too cartoonish? That was my
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
They were like
too cartoonish.
The way they were dressed and all. It seems like the way over like some sort of male fantasy of superhero women in superhero costumes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was. Yeah, and to me, I think it was Elio Garcia of Westeros.org that maybe put it into words, but so far, and again, I'm trying to be optimistic, we haven't really seen much of Nymeria and Tyene.
They've been between 2 minutes, yeah.
But he said that it seemed to him that it felt like they compressed the Sand Snakes into one character and then made them into 3 characters again, which is still how I feel about it.
It does seem that way.
So we'll see how it all plays out, but we're going to go into some immediate differences in their appearance, in their weapons, and just some changes between them, and we'll see how it all works out.
And the mystery of winklepickers will be revealed.
We're getting up to that. So the most significantly different is obviously Tyene. They've made her Ilaria's daughter here in the show, which obviously changes her significantly. I don't really consider this to be Tyene in the books. I really wish they'd changed her name. They have changed names before in the past, for Talisa, for even Asha, who isn't really that much different. But there's one immediate similarity, interestingly, to the book version that I noticed. She's described in the books as a child woman with her soft hands and little giggles. And this Tyene does seem a little bit like a child woman to me at first glance. She's childish. She's like her, the baby of the family out of the 3 Sand Snakes. She looks really different, and she's adept with knives rather than poisons. I'm going to guess she probably still uses poisons on her knives, though. her knives were Nymeria's knives originally in the books. She hides her knives well hidden, though, which is very different from Tyene. Just has her daggers, her snake daggers, out on the open. Aziz?
Yeah, their clothing is different. It's a little weird. It's a little overdone. Snakes on everything, straps, and I don't know. It was a little silly. It's hard to describe exactly. It's just the whole total picture isn't one particular thing that was awkward. It was just a lot of different things.
Yeah. Nymeria I'm most hopeful for, I have to say. We haven't seen much of her. She looks the most like Nymeria in the books, as it happens, despite her change to her mother is no longer a noblewoman from Belantis.
Yeah, I don't know if it's mentioned who her mother is.
Yeah, some
just
Eastern
someone.
culture.
Yeah.
Sure. But yeah, to go on to Obara and eventually the winklepickers. We've seen cast photos that show the sand snakes wear the same armor that Obara is wearing. They all wear it. But specifically, I don't know if you noticed, but her breastplate has nipples on it.
I did not notice her nipples.
Yeah. But the breastplates have nipples on it, which is very funny to me because there's a line in the books that it's repeated at least 4 times, unless I missed one. As useless as nipples on a breastplate, and yet her armor has nipples. Which is awkward, and at first, when the first photos came out, people were really making fun of it, obviously, because that's ridiculous to happen, and they said that it was a mistake and that it was too late to change the mistake. Okay, whatever, it's a mistake, they feel bad, the costumer probably, it sucks for them, but then I saw an interview in Vanity Fair with Obara, Keisha Castle Hughes, and the interview said, one part of what makes her character so intimidating is her wardrobe. Obara and her sisters wear armadillo skin-like chest plates with nipples that give them seductive and alluring looks, which keep their enemies off guard. Obara wears her armor 24/7, Castle Hughes notes. She always wants to be ready for battle. As for the nipples, it's Game of Thrones. You still have to keep it sexy, she said. Which, I'm thinking it's a weird interpretation by Vanity Fair about like a throwaway comment that she made about it being you have to keep it sexy and that it isn't actually for distraction. But it would be a little distracting, and it made me think that maybe nipples on a breastplate aren't so useless after all. They're kind of like Jamie's golden hand surprise trick,
Yeah,
they
she
really
just thrust out her chest and rocks for a minute, and and then she shoves her spear right through his gawking mouth.
And then she kicks him up the winkle with her winkle pickers. So
it is finally time to reveal the mystery of the winkle picker.
yes.
Yeah, so who else noticed the sand snake shoes? Because all 4 of us all noticed this. They are like quite flat shoes with this quite preposterous point. The point, goes on.
It's a strange pearl, yeah.
Really strange, beyond where your toe is. If you've got it on HBO, you go and have a look at the shoes again. Because we're talking about this, I realised that they're called winklepickers, and introduced this concept to Aziz and Ash. They found it very funny.
As you can tell.
So we actually did. Yeah, we did some winklepicker research to see if HBO are just making up, if there's any historical basis for using these kind of shoes. Do you want to say something, Lady Gwyn?
Well, the historical basis for those long pointy-toed shoes goes back to medieval times. It's called a poulain or a krakow, and if you ever look at medieval art, you've probably seen them, but you probably haven't. But they're unrealistic in terms of any athletic activity. Well, I did think maybe, I guess if you were going to just sit on a horseback, I don't know, because you could stick your feet in the stirrups, but otherwise they're not the kind of shoe that you'd be wearing if you were doing, outdoor activity, kind of walking in sand. In fact, in the medieval examples, you'd have to actually put a secondary shoe on over them in order to go out in the dirty medieval streets, some kind of a wooden clog or something, because they were just really made for indoors, a court shoe.
So we were hoping that there was some reason for it, some sort of logical reason. Maybe there was some reason why Yeah, we thought maybe it helps in the desert or something like that, but no, it just seems to be, this is a way to look exotic or Middle Eastern.
Yeah, I mean, there are Arabian shoes, like Arabic shoes like that, you know, the kind of court jester shoes. It's a style, but that's like a style for, exactly, for being inside.
An indoor thing, yes,
not
like a
slipper. Not for when you're in your armor out in the desert, like ready for battle.
It seems like it would be really awkward for stirrups, like you're just...
Yeah, actually, yeah, probably.
Get caught.
But maybe they're a good weapon. Maybe like the nipples. We're going to see them as weapons.
Yeah.
I pick my weapon of choice when I'm offered. I pick a sword, but other people pick a winklepicker. Apparently.
Yeah.
Anyway, in the books, Obara has both the whip and the spear. They, you know, obviously here she only has her spear. They gave the whip to Nymeria. Not really sure why they moved her all around, except to give Tyene one of the weapons. They didn't want her to be weaponless, so they moved it all around. Obara gets one weapon. In the books, Obara is described as big-boned, and it's not really a surprise that they changed that, but it is notable, I thought, that she's a small girl. She's a small woman in the show, Keisha Castle Hughes. She just is. She was decent as Obara. It's funny, I noticed one thing in the books is that Obara is described as always walking too fast.
Yeah, I remember that. And she pushes his wheelchair too fast.
Yeah, she's always too fast. Like, she always has, you know, something she has to do. And it's just funny because telling the story, she's specifically walking very slowly here, telling this story with steps. You know, it was very different. But I hope we get the skull.
I do too.
Her kissing the skull.
That would be cool. That'd be a good nod to the fandom there.
Yeah, I'm hoping. I also hope we get Arya and the skull as well.
We wanted to sit here and make a few predictions on the future of this plotline, but we are really pressed for time with this episode because we have so much to talk about. So we'll save those predictions for another time. But I will drop one teaser. Consider the possibility that instead of Myrcella being injured, maybe she just gets outright killed. Think on that. See and tell us what you think as far as that possibility. Think it through. In the meantime, since we don't have time to go through that in great detail, let's go all the way away from the desert and into the snow. Let's go to the wall. Jon and Sam talking about how they're desperate for men, fairly similar to the book situation. They're asking lords for more. Now this includes Bolton, which is a test for Jon. His vows are tested twice in rapid succession here in this scene. And he sticks to it. At first he's disgusted, decides he won't do it, but Sam talks him into it, pointing to how it's an issue of their vows and how they're supposed to stay neutral. Now, just the idea of Jon sending a letter to Bolton makes me think of what would happen in reply. A letter coming back from the Boltons brings us into maybe pink letter territory. And Watchiner Shane O'Connell suggests that Roose could take over Cersei's plotline, which was didn't come to fruition in the books. But remember, Cersei wanted to send, I think, Osney Kettleblack to the Wall to kill Jon. Well, Roose has already sent a man to infiltrate the Wall to this point, not to kill Jon, but he did it once with Locke. Maybe he'll send more men with something else in mind. He could send them as, hey, I'm sending you soldiers, but really they're under orders to do something else. Roose is surely aware that Stannis is at the Wall, and he can't be happy with that. So he's going to as suspicious as Roose is, he's probably going to think that Jon is not on his side, especially considering that Jon is a Stark by birth. So we wonder, Watchner Vin Sidious asks about the number of Night's Watch in the book versus show at this point, and I think that the 50 number that they quote is a number of fighters that are left. I think there's more than 50 men on the Wall in total. That would be a bit much, especially after Jon suggests sending 10 or so to go with Janos Slynt to Greyguard. So I don't think he would have sent 10 of 50 total men to an abandoned castle. That doesn't sound like the right plan. So we'll have to see how that goes. It seems like there might be less men in the show than in the books, but we'll see if they handle that. It might put more of an emphasis on the need for an integration with the wildlings. Watchner Sophia Alarcon asks, or predicts rather, that Jon is going to die earlier in the season than we might have thought, so that we have time to see that he's not truly dead. Having that be a cliffhanger might be a bit much for the audience. We'll see. Good idea, good concept. I think there's a chance for that. I still kind of lean towards it coming towards the end of the season, or near the end of the season, or perhaps the last thing.
Right.
But I could definitely see why they might do it that way. Let's talk about Selyse, Shireen, Stannis, and Melisandre. There's some interesting commentary on Jon Snow's mother. Now, for book readers, we all know where that's headed. For show watchers, that was probably a bolt from the blue. But of more interest, perhaps, to us is the queer talk about Shireen and her blood and how the Lorelei doesn't care about her scars. That could lead to some sort of sacrifice, which we've kind of been predicting for a little while, and the books seem to hint at something like that. Now, as far as Stannis bringing Melisandre on campaign, that's another thing that comes out of this scene. That's very different from the books, even though we have seen in the books that Melisandre points out that Stannis had learned from his mistake by not bringing her on the Blackwater. Yeah, he still doesn't bring her on campaign here in the north. So, Yoke Boy, some thoughts on Mel's Dance with Dragons story, in general.
Right, okay. Mel's Dance with Dragons story is really propelled by visions, I would say. Give him just one example. There's the Grey Girl. She also tells Jon that wildlings are going to attack Eastwatch, again after a vision. You do have the Glamour Mance, who's obviously not in the show anymore, and kind of more warnings to Jon. So, yeah, and this is in a book where she even gets a POV. It's still very vision-y, you know. It doesn't translate to the show, is what I'm trying to say. They're not big on visions and stuff. I don't think they've done the kind of prophetic stuff. I don't think they deal with it very well, and I think they know that. So I think if she goes with Stannis, you're not losing a whole lot. I think it might actually be a smart solution for the show to do that.
Yeah, so you don't think there'll be an Azor Ahai at all in the show?
No, that's another thing. You get hints in the books that she's about to kind of start considering if Jon is Azor Ahai. She looks for Azor Ahai, and all she sees is snow, and it's got an uppercase S. That's a lot of people know that one. So I don't know. I don't know if they're going to have Azor Ahai in the show. I know that Azor Ahai has actually been mentioned in. I remember as early as season 2, you saw Mel kind of making prophecies by the pyre on Dragonstone. But I don't know if they're even going to have an Azor Ahai. That they might just think it's better just to not have it. Again, I think they struggle to present the kind of otherworldly aspects like prophecies and visions and memories. Even they seem like they don't want to go there. So there you go. Yeah. Maybe no Azor Ahai.
So we also have Stannis and Shireen. I thought this was a really important scene. It's not particularly the Stannis we are used to from the books, but the Stannis from the books is already long gone in the show. They've played this character a lot differently and a little bit too flat. So I was very happy to see them expand and give him some depth, give him some more likability, which it's not the book type of likability that we have for him, but it's something. So I was happy to see them at least somewhat make up for his lack of depth. It seems like they also repaired Jon Snow in a similar way. I've seen some talk about that, how he was kind of not handled properly and how they're starting to do it better. They're starting to run this character better. Now, Lady Gwyn, you noticed something interesting in the background of this scene with Stannis and Shireen.
Well, Shireen walks in the room and she goes right over to a table. There's a table, there's some scrolls on the table, and what looks like maybe a pile of rocks, and she picks one up and starts playing with it. So I wondered, could that be obsidian? Because book readers will know that obsidian plays a big part in the books, and Stannis is noted to have sent to Dragonstone for obsidian. So this seemed kind of like it had gold flecks in it, but possible that there were...
Yeah, we looked at the screenshot, didn't we? We looked at the screenshot. It did seem black, but like you say, it did seem kind of a bit flecked with gold, perhaps. So... Now, this is right before she picks up the Bolton pieces. It's the first table, just in case any of your watchers want to go and grab the screenshot. It's the first table.
Okay. Now, this is a good place to point out that obsidian in Song of Ice and Fire is different than Real World Obsidian. George has specifically pointed that out, and there's some clues that give that away as well. There's the fact that Obsidian comes in several different colors rather than just black, which I don't think is a real world feature of it. So maybe the gold flecks are part of that, or maybe it's gold and black rock. To me, that's what is that? That's Kraken rock, right? That's a Greyjoy rock.
Greyjoy rock.
Speaking of gray, there is also more grayscale talk in this scene, which marks a theme of quite a bit of grayscale talk. It's really just it's impossible to miss by this point. It's been brought up so many times.
Yeah.
And we also learned that it can be passed differently. This is kind of, I guess this might be news to us, Lady Gwen. Is there anything like that in the books about it coming through like a doll like that?
I never heard that in the books. I don't recall. But grayscale being passed along in objects or in clothing is very much like something that happens in, or not anymore, but has happened in real life. Smallpox was passed along in clothing and objects, and was in fact used as a weapon. So it just made me wonder.
Another crazy weapon.
Westeros,
if someone did that with grayscale,
just watch out. If we have a scene at the end of an episode where we're like, what the heck is this? It's a shipload arriving, and then there's just a bunch of dolls in it.
Just a bunch of creepy dolls.
Better watch out. Better watch out, folks. I feel bad for those dock workers in particular.
Yeah.
But the other kind of bombshell that has a immediate domino effect is Stannis casually dropping the line that the stone men live in the doomed ruins of Valyria, which is very different from where they are in the books. Not in a fundamental way. I mean, it's not a huge difference as far as the plot goes, but it immediately tells us what's happening, because we know the Sorrows are where John Connington got grayscale, where Tyrion falls into the water. Well, guess that'll be Jorah now. Looks like Jorah and Tyrion are heading straight to the Sorrows. The show's version of the Sorrows is in Valyria, and they're going from Valyria to Slaver's Bay. You go right around Valyria. So there's really no way of avoiding that.
You know, there is one kind of interesting difference, actually, for it being Valyria. It doesn't really matter to most people, but to kind of history fans like us, I guess it's kind of interesting that the Sorrows are the ruins of the Rhoynar, you know, and like perhaps that was the Rhoynar curse that like started this as a theory that it's related to that like the ruins of Croyane, and it's the ruins of Valyria instead, and the Valyrians were, you know, at the downfall of the Rhoynar.
That's kind of neat, yeah.
And instead, the Rhoynar curse is at Valyria. But
a little more about this. That's a great idea. A little more about this when we talk about Jorah and Tyrion, and a little more about other places grayscale could pop up later in the show. We've actually got several ideas of where it could come up. Melisandre and Jon. Here comes the other major test of Jon's vows and his sense of duty. We have this whole duty versus love theme, which is a big thing in the books. I guess they give a nod to it here, where Jon uses both as his reasoning for why he has to turn down Melisandre. It's not just his duty; it's also the fact that he loves Ygritte. So they kind of combine those notions there. I thought that was cool. We're reminded some important lines from the books were recreated in this scene. She talks about her life versus death, power to cast shadows speech, which is really important. We wonder if Melisandre's going to send some shadows out. In the books, I suppose that could have something to do with sending shadows after the Boltons even. I don't know. That's a different... I hadn't thought about that in book terms, but in the show that might make more sense. Then we have the bombshell line that I think a lot of us expected to come from Melisandre because it happens in the books, but at that particular moment it was, whoa there, you know nothing, Jon Snow. Yoke Boy, you had some thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is from Jon's first chapter in Dance. First, Mel warns Jon about his enemies, and he says he kind of knows who they are, so you know, don't bother telling me, I already know. And then we get the daggers in the dark line, which is, of course, you know, quite famous for where that one leads.
Yeah.
And then she warns him to keep his wolf beside him, and that her vision was very cold. And then he responds, you know, it's always cold on the wall. And she says, you think so? I know so, my lady. Then you know nothing, Jon Snow. And then she whispers. So it's really kind of poetic Of course, at the end of Dance, he doesn't keep Ghost beside him, like Mel warned. He gets stabbed by the daggers in the dark, and so this was a kind of the first very early hint in Dance that his fate in the very first chapter of his chapters. And anyway, it was a really creepy ending to his first Dance chapter with Mel taking Egret's line from out of nowhere, and I thought it really worked on the show. Again, like you said, because we were expecting it before or somewhere else, and it caught everyone. Even book readers didn't quite see it coming, but it was there, and it was delivered very well by Carice, who I think plays Melisandre very well.
Yeah, I definitely just jumped. I was like, hey. And then it struck me that I was surprised by something that I kind of knew was coming. So I definitely give them a lot of credit for pulling that off well. And the other thing that happens in the books that goes along these lines is Jon, which I think was funny because when the scene starts, Jon says, "What by? Well, I don't want to look into any flames," and she says, "Oh, there's no magic, nothing going on here, no magic." And in the books, of course, she bewitches Ghost somehow and gets Ghost to behave differently. And it's like, you're definitely using magic there, I think. Now, another very subtle thing brought up in this scene is Melisandre, again, like we talked about last episode, Melisandre is again trying to encourage Jon to join the war effort against the Boltons, which again makes me suspicious about the pink letter and the idea that maybe Stannis or Melisandre could have somehow written it. I consider that idea to be possible, but kind of on the crackpot side before. The show is making me rethink that a little bit. But the other thing that's mentioned is that she points out that Jon has knowledge of the castle, of the secret tunnels, things that Theon also knows, that Theon's role is of that in the books. Seems like Theon's going to be the one to do those things. So that is very curious. Now, a quick note, one thing that I've done a lot to prepare for the show episodes is, like I said, as we restudied the books a lot, I re-listened to, in particular, A Feast for Crows. I listened to A Dance for Dragons as well, but I've really been keyed in on Feast for Crows because of the High Sparrow scenes and Littlefinger stuff, some stuff with the Faceless Men. And a great way to review that while you're doing other things, way to combine your chores and your exercise with Song of Ice and Fire, is to go ahead and go to audible.com, or rather, go to historyofwesteros.com and click on the audible.com link, sign up for a free 30-day trial, use your one free download that they give you as part of that to download A Feast for Crows or Dance with Dragons, and you'll be right there with us. And you'll also be supporting the show along the way. Let's move on to the Winterfell Crypts, a place we haven't been to since, I suppose, Season 1, a place we might not have thought we'd ever come back to on the show. A place that we get to see in the books in A Dance with Dragon through Theon's point of view as well. We get Sansa and Littlefinger with the feather deal with Sansa there, which is a reference to a straight shot away from Season 1, Episode 1. Robert Baratheon puts that feather there and laments Lyanna's death. I wouldn't have guessed, by the way, that Littlefinger, of all people, would be the one to give the Tournament of Harrenhal story. If you told me that before the show started, I'd be like, how on earth? Why would Littlefinger be the one to tell? Of course, he also tells the Hound's story, so I wouldn't have predicted that either. So, Lady Gwen.
Gossip.
Yeah. Lady Gwen, tell us some of your thoughts on why this scene was done the way it was versus how it was carried out in the books.
Well, they really, first of all, they really couldn't have had Ned deliver that information as he did in the books, because it was internal, it was a dream, there was no one there to hear it. And it was way too long ago. No one would remember it. I mean, they would have just had to bring it up all over again. So definitely understand why they did it, and I think it was well done.
Ed probably wouldn't have wanted to tell anybody, but they'd have to explain why he's talking about it, too.
Exactly. It just would have been way too complicated. So the other thing that, this scene proves to us or shows to us is that Littlefinger has a plan, after all, something I think a lot of people were wondering after last week. He has a plan. It involves Stannis, and Stannis here, or Littlefinger rather, he starts to seem like he's the stand-in for the Great Northern Conspiracy, if you follow that theory at all. the basic idea behind it is that the Northern Lords plan to use Stannis to bring about the downfall of the Boltons. So here's Littlefinger, and this seems to me like that's exactly what he's trying to orchestrate. And I find it interesting that he says he's a betting man, so he's going to bet on Stannis, who he notes is going to King's Landing, which is exactly where he's going. So very interesting. On the other hand, Littlefinger appears to have completely misjudged Ramsay Bolton.
Yes, or at least perhaps not fully accounted for the possibilities therein.
Yeah.
Now, Yolkboy, your assessment of Littlefinger was right on. He spells out, I guess this would have been, I think we talked about it last episode, I'm not sure. He spells out his outsider status at the envy and longing he felt at Harrenhal, right? If he loved Catelyn, he would envy Ned and Winterfell and all that. So that's coming to pass, just like you said.
Yeah, I said Sansa, the combination of Sansa and Winterfell under his thumb would be his wet dream. So
How could we forget that?
So let's talk a little bit about the potential here. It's really this plot line makes people a little bit nervous. I hope that they don't do anything too crazy, too brutal here, but we'll just have to wait and see. We could try to at least treat it as lighthearted as possible in the meantime. Sanram? What do we do? Ramsan? Sansay? What is this couple called?
I like Sansay. I don't like Ramsan.
I was just going to say Ramsan, just to Sansay.
Sansay, I like that.
Some listeners have asked how it's even possible.
Sansay.
How it's even possible for Sansa to remarry. That's a good question. There's the annulment on the grounds of non-consummation. That's one argument that has.
And in the show, they seem to be playing it off as though your marriage is annulled, which I'm not sure if in the show that's just the truth or some weird misconception or.
And there's the potential for the wrong gods being invoked. This is a marriage of Northerners. It was Sansa was married in front of the 5-7. That's a possible argument they can make for why it's invalid. Now in the books, it's a bit different. Sansa at one point thinks man can wed me so long as my dwarf husband still lives somewhere in this world. Littlefinger's attitude seems to be a little different, but he still tells her that. Yeah, maybe Sansa can't marry, but Elaine can marry whoever she wants. So the point there being Elaine is not married to Tyrion or anyone, if that matters. So now, Yolkboy, you had some other thoughts on the whole concept of marriage here, that it might not go the way we're thinking.
Well, just to tie in with what you've been saying about the annulment possibilities and stuff, there was that line, next time you see me, I expect I'll be married. And Littlefinger, did you see a little kind of smirk on his face, a little cheeky look, like no? And I think that Sansa's first move in her game will be to at least prolong the marriage to Ramsay, and I think you kind of touched on how she might actually do that. But yeah, I think now Sansa's playing, and this will be her first little move to prolong this marriage with Ramsay, so really, so it doesn't happen, but prolong it long enough for Stannis to come and take Winterfell.
Right, so she can say, I can't marry till we have an annulment. That's just, that's the cause. It's better. It's not my fault.
So it could be just a delaying tactic,
That's a good one. Watchiner Recon Seattle asks, will Sansa take on some of Lady Stoneheart's role? That's an interesting question. That harkens back to what I was saying at the beginning of this episode about looking for opportunities to existing characters to take on some of the roles of cut characters. And, well, one of the things Lady Stoneheart's doing is killing off a lot of Freys. Well, there's no Freys except for one here at Winterfell, but there are Boltons. And we already know that part of the Jane Poole Theon Winterfell plot involves people being killed in the night, mysterious murders committed probably by Mance's washerwomen, but not all of them, and possibly engineered in part by Wyman Manderley. So we could see a little bit of.
We could also see Sansa Manderley.
Sansa Manderley, yeah, Sanserly.
Yes, her making some pies with the help of some serving women. No.
We could see some pie action. We could see, we talked about last episode how Lady Walda makes a lot of pies, a lot of pies out of her.
Right.
Or how about Ramsay eating Roose? I don't know. That's something funny like that could happen.
I actually talked about the Sansa Manderley, the idea of her taking that revenge concept, because obviously Manderley's a little closer to Winterfell than Lady Stoneheart is. Although the Lady Stoneheart comparison would be somewhat apt as well. But I was talking about it with Geek Furious, who also suggests that Littlefinger could tell Cersei that the Sansa that he gave, Roose and Ramsay isn't real. Which would make a lot of sense. That would be awesome. I hope that he does say that, because it's like a really cool nod to Jane Poole.
He could even say her name. Her real name is Jane Poole.
Yeah, he could say anything. Yeah, they could make it an actual nod to that.
He could say it's just some girl from one of my brothels.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. He could say that. He could just easily lie to her, and Cersei is always lied to in A Feast for Crows. So it's also a nod to that.
Yeah, well, that would be a really cool way for them to. Bring dial back into the book plot. Say, hey, look, we're still keeping this in mind.
Yeah, well, no matter what, Littlefinger, I think, is going to be lying to Cersei when it gets there. Like, we're going to see him blatantly lying to her and other people, probably.
That is a prediction that is not at all going out on a limb. Now, so one thing we touched on briefly, Lady Gwen, you mentioned this as well, that Littlefinger's plan starts to make a lot more sense. It seems less reckless than it was. It's still a gamble. It still could go wrong, but it's not just some crazy, put Sansa out there risky maneuver. It's starting to take more shape, and there may still be an angle to it we haven't figured out. It may make even more sense later. It might make less sense later as well. But I'm glad it's making more sense. It was a little awkward before, so it's good that they tied that up. Now, R plus L equals J. Good timing for them bringing this up. They did it in a cool way. It's handled in a bunch of different scenes. We get different accounts of Rhaegar. Lady Gwen, take us through some of that.
Okay. Well, this was so well done. It's all presented exactly in the sequence that it's delivered in the books. Only, of course, it's greatly compressed into this one episode. We start with the Stannis comment about Ned. He says it's not Ned Stark's way to father a bastard on a tavern slut, I think is what Solis said. That basically takes us through a ton of the Ned character development in Game of Thrones, with people talking about how Ned refused to speak of Jon's mother, Jon being sure that his mother was highborn, and this stuff like that. Even going to for the first time in years, when he's coming out of Littlefinger's brothel, and he thinks about Rhaegar and how he was pretty sure he probably didn't frequent brothels, indicates that probably Ned wouldn't either. So. As sort of his definition of honor. And then moving from that, you have, the Littlefinger delivering the story of the turning of Harrenhal. That's taken all directly, almost word for word, right from, except for adding his point of view, from Ned's fever dream in the Black Cells, including the bit about the winter roses, blue as frost. And then Sansa has this line about Rhaegar being a rapist. That right there is taken directly from a Bran point of view, where he's down in the crypts with Osha, and he says that Robert was betrothed to marry Lyanna, but Prince Rhaegar carried her off and raped her. So So
Bran had been listening in on Bobby B, hadn't he? There.
This is what I think in the books. That I don't know. This is kind of a mystery how Bran ever heard this story, because obviously Ned never heard it. Never spoke about it. So I suspect that Bran was maybe spying on Ned and Robert when they were in the crypts, that very first scene, because Robert is the one who said, he was a rapist. So,
yeah.
So setting Rhaegar, so you go from Ned wouldn't father bastards to this thing about Rhaegar and Lyanna to this Rhaegar is a rapist to Barristan saying, no, Rhaegar was a nice guy. He's not a rapist. He loved singing, and he didn't like killing people, and he gave money to charity, and so it follows along that right there with some of the Barristan info that he gives Dany in A Storm of Swords about her brother. So really well done. I didn't ever expect to be so impressed with the way they handled this subject.
Yeah, I agree. I was kind of dreading the way they bring it up. I wasn't sure they'd be able to do it well. I was very surprised with how well they did it. Not because they haven't done things well before, but because it seems like it would have been hard. It seems like it would be hard for them to do.
Yes, exactly.
And whenever something with such a big challenge, it's hard to have a lot of confidence. But good job, guys. They did it. They did it well.
Yeah.
So unless we have more thoughts on R + L = J.
I have a thought on Barristan's story.
Okay.
And I saw a really funny kind of joke about it, which is, Barristan tells her, he went out there and sang in the streets all the time. Like, Daenerys' reaction is being like, I thought you said people liked him. But, anyways.
Well, no, he sang well. He's out there just singing really horribly. It's like, someone tell this prince that he can't sing.
They're giving him money to be quiet.
Everyone, because he's a prince, no one will tell him he's doing it badly. No one wants to tell him to his face that he's a horrible singer. So let's go to Essos. Let's talk about Tyrion and Jorah. We touched on them briefly before. It seems, like we said, it seems very likely Jorah will be not only falling into the water like Connington to saving Tyrion from Grayscale, but he perhaps will take Connington's role as being patient zero in Westeros, which says a lot about Jorah's arc. It says that he will survive Meereen, perhaps be brought back into Dany's good graces. Maybe he will do something.
Or it means that Patient Zero, that there's going to be the Grayscale outbreak in Meereen, and they're going to combine the idea of the Pale Mare with Grayscale and have it happen there.
Absolutely. Justin Nguyen, Watchers Justin Nguyen and Matt Brown made that exact suggestion.
Oh, yes, of course.
Very good.
Yes.
I think that's a very good catch. If we could have Grayscale starting in Meereen and then moving to Westeros rather than having two separate diseases.
Yes.
That is right along the lines of what the show does, rather than confusing viewers with two different types of diseases.
The conservation of diseases.
Love conservation of diseases. Yes, in full effect here we have that. So the good news there is, if you recall from our previous predictions, I was very worried not only that Varys would die, but that Varys would be the one to catch Grayscale and bring it to Westeros. So I don't think that is a problem at all anymore. So at the end we will revisit our worry of the week, and you'll see that Varys is tumbled on the rankings a bit. He's not nearly as in danger as he was. So what about, Lady Gwyn, you had some thoughts on the scene as well. It was part of the theme of this episode to have exposition and explanations.
Yes. Boy, is Tyrion smart. He figured out Jorah's entire story based on just recognizing his dragon epaulette.
Yeah, his armor. He's like, bear, dragon, I got it.
I know what happened to you, and he spelled the whole thing out. Plus being, sitting through a couple of small council meetings, apparently. But
yeah, there's that too.
Yeah, it all clicked for him. He's like, oh, bear, a sigil in Essos. Oh, obviously this is Jorah Mormont.
Everybody knows.
Right. And this is obviously what happened. So
let's move further east, as Tyrion said so succinctly in the episode. I thought we were going west to Westeros, which is west. We're going east. I don't know if I'm pointing in the right directions here.
Oh.
But neither do you guys. You don't know which way our studio faces. So that's that. Now we head over to Essos itself, or to Meereen itself, rather. Hizdar and Dany, we have more foreshadowing of the fighting pits. This idea has been talked about just about every episode. Well, I guess the one episode Dany wasn't in, it wasn't talked about. But of the 4 episodes this season, the fighting pits have been brought up, I believe, 3 times. Looks like Jorah will be in there fighting in the pits. Maybe he'll be, his pit name will be Dr. Grayscale. He'll be fighting people with his grayscale, his fast-acting grayscale. His opponents will turn to stone in front of him.
That's his golden hand surprise, nipples on a breastplate move, grayscale.
Right. Sir Basilisk.
Everyone.
Yes.
Sir Medusa. But there's interesting talk about the traditions and how the fighting pits are more than just sport. Yokeboy, why don't you take us through that a bit?
Yeah, it wasn't the line from Hizdar as he's asking for the 2000th time to open the fighting pits. Tradition is the only thing holding this city together. And the scene, I don't know if you noticed, but it was kind of interspliced with the Harpies starting to run riot. So it's really setting up the marriage now. It's like Dany is got this choice, and I think we'll see in maybe the next episode or the one after. Pretty soon, we're going to see something twig in Dany's head where she thinks this is the solution, and I've got to marry this dude, even though he's pretty boring. He's not as cool as Dario. I don't really want to do this, but so I think we'll see something in Dany where she realizes that she doesn't do this, she's going to be in some serious trouble with her regime and herself. They're going to be in serious trouble.
Yeah, because she's upset not just the ex-slave masters, obviously, but she's upset the population with the Massador thing, and so she's got a lot of amends to make. And she's running out of advisors and counselors, isn't she? We have this, like you said, the Sons of the Harpy doing their thing was interposed over this discussion, just like some of the Faith Militant was interposed with the Cersei and High Sparrow discussion. So that was a reuse of that device that I thought was very well done. Now, a few clarifications here. Who are the Sons of the Harpy? The show has taken a few liberties here, so we can't be sure. I'm not 100% sure of this. We're shown a Son of the Harpy early on who seems to be just a regular guy. But my impression more is that the Sons of the Harpy are mostly sons of the nobility, sons of members of the great families that were displaced by Dany's conquest, ex-slaveholding families, in other words, ex-slave master families. And when you're a child, especially a male child in a world like this of nobility, you're trained to fight from an early age. Fighting is part of your upbringing. So these guys aren't just. I saw some complaints that maybe the Unsullied should have made better account of themselves, and I kind of agree with that. But on the other hand, there's this aspect where these guys should be better fighters than just random street thugs. So I do think the scene had some realism issues, but it also has a very interesting. It also does a great job of highlighting something that Dario brought up earlier, which is also reflected in the show, or in the books rather, which is that the Unsullied are great soldiers, but they're bad police. They're not cunning. They don't understand the human mind. They don't understand the mindset of a skulking thief or a guy who hides in the shadows. They understand battlefields and fighting in rows and things like that. So I don't think that Dario's men, for example, would have fallen into that ambush.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to me that they had Dario stay and guard Daenerys there. It would have been so much better for them to switch spots. I mean, they wanted this to happen to Barristan, so they wrote it like that. But really, it makes more sense to me for Barristan to always be protecting Daenerys, for Dario to go out.
You're right. That's why Dany needs more advisors. Apparently, she needs you as one of her advisors.
It's kind of because he's talking about going out on the streets with Rhaegar, and so he's going out patrolling, kind of, inspired by that conversation was what I gathered from it, I guess.
Yeah. So that's a good point. Lady Gwen, you had some thoughts as well on some of these differences between the Unsullied and the way they're portrayed and the way they are, what their perspective, what their job is, and what they're good at, not good at.
Yeah. Well, it's just Barristan says something in the book which pretty much illuminates this, what the Unsullied are. It says they're soldiers, not warriors, if it please your grace. They were made for the battlefield, to stand shoulder to shoulder behind their shields with their spears thrust out before them. Their training teaches them to obey fearlessly, perfectly, without thought or hesitation, not to unravel secrets or ask questions.
Yeah. Now, that said, despite the fact that the Unsullied were out of their element, that they're not necessarily in fighting in the way they're used to. Maybe they could have lined up more. I would have liked to see them try to make some sort of shield wall, even though there was only...
I said that, too. I wish that there had been some sort of a testudo, back-to-back shield walls. I thought they could have,
But they, despite maybe that they missed some missed opportunities there with the choreography or the scene setup, the Unsullied still acquitted themselves well. It was like a 25 on 6, and at the end of it, even though Barristan comes in and he kills like 7 guys by himself before finally getting killed, but every Son of the Harpy that was in that scene died. The only one that seems to be getting out of there alive is Grey Worm. So it's not as if the Unsullied were just got their asses kicked. Everyone died except for Grey Worm, apparently. So here's an interesting, subtle thing from the books. Grey Worm yells out in pain. Now, somebody pointed out that the Unsullied aren't supposed to cry out in pain, are they? Aren't they immune to pain? Not so fast. Yoke Boy, go ahead and explain that for us.
Okay, so in the books, a large reason why they're supposed to not feel any pain is because when they're in Astapor and they're training, and they're waiting to go off to be bought, they drink the wine of courage, and they're supposed to carry on drinking this. This slowly, takes any pain away. They drink it. I think they might start drinking it after they're cut, but they're supposed to keep on drinking it. And I get the impression that it's not just physical pain that stops. I think it, dehumanizes them. The ingredients for wine of courage are very hard to get hold of. One of the ingredients is bloodfly larvae, it says in the books. So you imagine that, it's quite hard to make this stuff. You've got to know what you're doing. In short, I don't think Dany is giving her Unsullied the wine of courage that they're kind of supposed to have to maintain their machine-like, anti-pain and machine-like mentality. And then in Meereen we get the Unsullied lying with prostitutes because they need comfort. I think this is because they're not drinking the wine of courage. They're becoming human, is my point. Dany is not supplying them with this kind of magic juice that makes them Unsullied in the books.
That's really interesting. I wonder what impact that could have in the books as it goes forward. It could be that you're right; they could be becoming more human over time. By the time she gets to Westeros, they could start to be changing, evolving a little bit, becoming.
They could start to be scared. They could be susceptible to
cold.
To things. Yeah, they could be susceptible to things they're not supposed to be susceptible to.
That would be really interesting. I never really thought about their lack of fear face down with something supernatural. They're trained to not have this fear and to stand in discipline. But how is that going to maintain in the face of, say, an army of whites or White Walkers? I wonder if they can still hack it under those circumstances. That'll be very interesting to see. I never thought about really far ahead things like that. I'm thinking about like the Dothraki fighting the others. And all sorts of.
They just need a lot of the wine of courage for every person there. It'll keep them warm because it's wine too.
Or they need to give the wine of cowardice to all the whites. Wine of cowardice. We've already, apparently, according to the show earlier, wine gives all men courage.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Sansa and Littlefinger's scene.
That's funny.
All wine is the wine of courage.
One interesting thing I thought was about Barristan's death scene is that he doesn't have his throat slit, which was kind of an odd thing to me at first for them to like save Barristan, who's clearly doomed, and it feels like he should just be dead when Daenerys sees him anyways. My first thought was that maybe Barristan would have some final words, and that's why they didn't cut his throat. But my second thought was that in the preview for next week, we see him like laying there in state, and the slit throat would make for a gruesome scene for Daenerys to like say goodbye to, and for the special effects, that the makeup and everything. It's just easier to save him from having his throat slit, and of course they're going to want to make sure he's dead, so they had to cover that. And I'm pretty sure that that's just it. And he has no last words. That's my thought.
I struggle to think what he could possibly get out in one sentence.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's true. That's why I was like, that can't be right. And so then when I saw the preview, I was like, oh, it would have been too gruesome.
He could say something like Jon Snow, but why? I mean,
that'd be
bizarre. Weird. Yeah, it would be bizarre.
I think Barristan's last words were whooping everyone's ass.
He definitely went out like a badass. He took on, like I said, I think it was about 8-on-1, and they were having so much trouble with it. It was only because there were so many of them, and he doesn't have eyes in the back of his head. That's just the way it is. He went out a hero, and it was very sad. It's got a lot of people upset. Hopefully it doesn't foreshadow an early death for him in the books.
Fire, yeah.
I don't know. We just have to wait and see. I think Barristan is gonna still have. I don't know. I don't know if he'll die in the Battle of Fire. What do you guys think? You think that he might die in the Battle of Fire?
I think that he will be right for a while. Actually, I don't think he's one that's going to last that long. But we think there's some of his arc to come. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's not done yet.
Not done yet. No.
So, what about the ramifications of his death in terms of Dany's plot and her, her arc and her outlook in Meereen? One thing, it really shows even more that she's in need of new counsel, and so her need for Tyrion and/or Varys, and maybe a new trustworthy strong arm like Jorah is now called for again. Mm-hmm. Now, what do we think about Grey Worm? Do we think he's going to survive?
Yeah, I think he's going to survive, and that he's going to be sick, or not, like, wounded for at least a little while, and Missandei will be taking care of him, and we'll get scenes with them bringing them closer together. Oh, I think that specifically because in the trailer we saw a shot. We saw a shot of Missandei, like, leaned over Grey Worm's body, and either he's dead there, she's saying goodbye, or that's like a thing in this season is Missandei taking care of him. I think he's going to survive, though.
We're going to see a nurse dynamic, are we?
Yeah, I think
romance.
So, I do.
Romance in the hospital.
Yeah, I think so, too, but I have to say I watched with an Unsullied who pointed out that scene, just like you just said, he was lying prone in the scene, so, not necessarily. He was very concerned.
Yeah, it might just be a very sad Missandei scene with her saying goodbye to Grey Worm. They never had anything happen between them. Yeah, that could just be it. That's true. I definitely don't think. I think it's about 50-50 for me that he'll survive. Yeah. I just don't think they're going to want to introduce another Unsullied captain.
Right.
Is my main thought.
Yeah,
I agree.
So
there's no more colors or insects left to use.
Well, I think that in a way the job of Barristan to perhaps advise Dany and stuff like that can be passed on to Tyrion. So in a sense, I see Barristan. I see why they think he's disposable now. Tyrion's coming along. He can give backstory from things he's read. He's got wisdom from stuff he's read in books. He can figure things out for Dany. Whereas Grey Worm isn't really disposable. They just have to get another actor in. It would be a bit pointless.
Yeah. So also the other thing that Dany loses with Barristan being out is the opportunity for some stories about her family. This is a bit of a disconnection for her. Her one connection to her family, or her main connection. There are a few other living characters that know about her family, that met them, that worked with them, etc. Varys being one in particular, who is apparently her ally in the show, and so he knows a few things about the Mad King and about Rhaegar. But
so it's going to be Varys or Tyrion, hasn't it, telling her these things? Like I said, Tyrion having read stuff or heard stuff on his travels or whatever. And is Varys going to show up and do it? Tyrion and Varys together could take over the Barristan role.
Yeah, it seems to be the way it's going. They're really cleaning. They're kind of cleaning house around Dany in a sense now. She's kind of left. She's got Dario in a span of her 3 episodes, because she wasn't in one of the episodes, where we see Massador go down. Then Barristan, and now Grey Worm's at least out of action for a while, if he's alive at all. And yeah, so she really, it's driving home the point that we kind of already knew that she needed help. Now we're really seeing she really needs help. She needs it even more than she had before.
You know what I thought about recently was I was trying to think about when the last time we saw Daenerys and Missandei alone together talking.
That hasn't happened this season at all, has it?
It hasn't happened this season. I'm trying to remember the last time it happened last season. I know it happened last season, but it wasn't a big part of it. But
come to think of it, Missandei has done almost nothing at all this season.
Yeah,
I guess that's coming.
She had a question for Grey Worm.
Yeah, you're right. That might have been her only dialogue this season.
Yeah, I kind of miss it. I'd like to see Daenerys interact with Missandei a little more personally. It's a dynamic that I really miss. It's not going to be the same in the show no matter what, because Missandei is such a little girl, in the books. But the mother dynamic was a lot of what I really liked about that. For her and paralleling her, actual people that she's called mother to. And anyways, I'm not sure. I kind of thought they'd have like perhaps a sexual dynamic between Daenerys and Missandei for a while. I was thinking that, and they haven't even interacted.
Yeah, the way HBO is, you could tell, like they wouldn't want to miss out on that.
Yeah,
I don't think the actresses were so down for that.
Yeah. Clark has made a lot of comments about her nudity and
like,
how she's empowered now. She doesn't have to be nude.
Yeah, she's like I'm a veteran actress now. They can't make me take my clothes off anymore. I say no. These are staying on.
Yeah.
And so, Yokbo, you had some thoughts on an interesting parallel to Barristan's going out scene and how it touches on what we aren't going to see, presumably in a pit scene later.
Yeah, I would hesitate to use the word parallel. It's
not a parallel. It's very loose parallel.
Maybe it's something in essence, right?
Oh, in essence, yeah. There you go.
When Drogon is going a bit mental in Daznak's pit, and Dany at that stage doesn't really know what she's doing. She recalls that she sees Barristan just running up to Drogon, saying, "Over here, try me," he says. He's ready to get roasted for Dany. He's just, like you said before, he's badass. He totally, fearless. Just went up to Drogon. No fear of getting just to try and let Dany get away. He would do that.
Just for that,
And here you have him kind of, the similar kind of essence of his fearless nature, where he would do something for others, and even to his own detriment. So definitely not a parallel, but just a little essence, I think.
So we're definitely, as we mentioned briefly before, we're definitely heading straight towards a marriage for Dany to Hizdahr, as is predicted by the book plots of the same nature. Hizdahr is a bit of a different character in the show. He's a lot more sympathetic than he is in the book so far, even though he's not exactly a fully fleshed out character. What little we get of him, he's a lot more charismatic, he's a lot more reasonable. He's not a doofus like Hizdahr in the books. Hizdahr in the book Hizdahr is very doofusy on purpose. It's not bad writing by any means. It's just a different character that you just... It's pretty impossible to like him in the books. This show version of him has some likable qualities, and we'll see if that goes up or down. I assume that we'll see a bit more of him when they get married.
What do you think of this Hizdahr so far? Do you think he's got any deeper plans, any deeper thoughts? I don't know. I think it's just because of the books. I just get this. I don't know if I'm curious what I should ask Sean what he thinks of Hizdahr, because I just get this feel that it's just like this gleam on his surface, that he's not really this person he's pretending to be.
That's interesting, because I feel like he's genuine, but you might be right. I definitely don't feel super confident.
I think I'm just on edge about Hizdahr having other things, up his sleeve.
Well, could he be involved with the Sons of the Harpy? I mean, his little speech was interspersed. You could interpret it that way. That's not my interpretation, but I could see how you could interpret that they interspersed that to hint at a link between Hizdahr and the Sons of the Harpy. He's from a noble house. They seem to represent the message of the noble people.
That's a good point. In the books too, the deal is Dany says 90 days without a murder and I'll marry you. And that is what happens. So 90, I don't know if they'll do 90 days, but she's probably going to have to ask for some sort of similar concession, like, hey, prove to me that you can do this or that, and I'll marry you. She needs some sort of proof of authority or proof that he can do it, which, of course, because he succeeds in that in the books, it touches on what you're saying there, Yokoi, about how it ties him to the Sons of the Harpy maybe more than one might have initially thought. And that might be, like you're saying, Ashaya, that might be why they're showing him to be sympathetic in that, just to make it a real surprise when he turns out to be...
I have no idea. I don't know that I've talked to Sean specifically about what he thinks of Hizdahr. It's kind of awkward because sometimes I can't ask him, like, what do you think of Hizdahr? Because just that question makes him think that he should think something more of Hizdahr.
What should I think of Hizdahr?
So I have to wait sometimes for him to bring it up, try to ask him in weird ways. I'll figure something out to ask him.
Now just to be clear, Sean is our co-host for our show only reviews. He's only read the first book. So he has a very analytical mind, but not knowing some of the things we do, he occasionally has really interesting perceptions on things that we wouldn't have caught because he's approaching it from with what's much different information. He's not biased. He doesn't have these expectations that we have because we can't help divorce what we know about the books from what we think might be coming in the show. So we'll have a chance to ask him, I suppose, when the idea of marriage comes up. That will make
that'll
it
be
a more reasonable question. Yeah, because you're right. It's really hard to ask unsullied people questions without giving away something. You're like, what do you think of? Like, how do you ask somebody about Jon? Like, what do you think about Jon Snow's mother? And think, what? I never thought about Jon Snow's mother. You're like, I shouldn't have asked you. But it's so that's a good idea, by the way, listeners out there. Tell us your experiences with your unsullied friends and interesting conversations that have come, interesting crackpot predictions they've made that turned out to be really silly, or things that they just totally nailed. We enjoy hearing those stories a lot, and some of the good ones maybe we'll put online here. We'll talk about them in some of our future episodes.
All right.
When do we think the marriage is going to happen? Real quick.
What's the episode?
That is, I don't think it'll just happen next episode. That seems
No.
too. It hasn't even been brought up as a possibility.
Well, my thought is that Daenerys was in all white in the fighting pit episode.
Yeah.
And so it looked to me like maybe it's like a joint wedding fighting pit scene.
They could combine that.
So, because she's clearly in all white. Daenerys does not just wear that all white
Good
getup.
call, yeah.
But and so that's the fighting pit scene with Jorah and Tyrion were shown there as well.
Yeah, Tyrion's sitting by Daenerys and Jorah's in it.
It's worth mentioning that in the books, I mean, it's not on their wedding is kind of off page. It just kind of leaves. I think it's a very long ceremony, and she comes out tied together with him. But I don't think there's any description of total exuberance or anything.
There is not. Yeah, it's yada yada yada. It's something along the lines of she puts on her outfit and then 4 hours later she was married. It was very.
She does all the different. They have all those different traditional things they want her to do.
Yeah. And I'm guessing that Giscari weddings don't have 7-course, 10-course, 12-course meals, because otherwise George would not have wasted an opportunity to describe all that Giscari food. So clearly that's not a big part of Giscari weddings. Food, they don't.
Unborn puppies. What do they have? Unborn puppies on a stick and stuff like that.
George really found a way to make the Giscari dislike just by their food. A culture that eats dog is a really good way to turn people off right away.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and it gets worse because remember, I think it's Dario that says this Giscari will eat anything except man or dragon, and they would eat dragon if they could. So. And we even hear that they do eat men because of the starvation that's happening in some of the slave cities. Right. So apparently they'll even eat men.
Anything.
So there you go, the Giscari meal plan all described. You didn't think you were getting that from History of Westeros, did you? But there you go.
Yeah, there's the Feast of Ice and Fire book where you make a cookbook. We're gonna make a Giscari Feast of Ice and Fire. Best food, all your locust cooking secrets.
People will ask us, is this a cookbook or a book of horrors?
Right.
Because every single meal in here sounds horrifying.
Illegal in 49 states.
Yeah, it's illegal, yeah. Read the cookbook that was banned all throughout the U.S.
Yeah.
Okay, folks, that is all for today. Let us talk about the people who make the show possible. Thank you to our Patreon supporters, Hand of the King, Cash Craig, a.k.a. Vaxis on the History of Westeros forums, and sometime player of Mario Kart with us. Warden of the North, Lord Parker, the Bastard of Starkville. Our southwestern and eastern borders are still undefended. Help us out if you can. Our Master of Coin is Lord Robert Jacobs. Our Grand Maester Itai. Our Grand Maester Itai? Our Grand Maester is Itai, who wears the jeweled collar of many metals. Rosie the Clever is our Master of Laws. Lord James Tuttle is our Master of Ships. History of Westeros Night's Watch Lord Commander is George the Golden. History of Westeros Kingsguard is commanded by Lord Commander Shepard. Sir Troy the Steady swings the Valyrian steel blade Fate as the History of Westeros King's Justice. Lady Direliz of Castle Naki and Lord Nathan of the Fire Fort provide the realm with lordly support as well. You can also support History of Westeros other than through Patreon. You can make a straight donation through historyofwesteros.com. You can also buy books, music, or anything through Amazon.com. If you use the links on the right side of historyofwesteros.com, anything you purchase through there will cost the same as if you had gone straight to Amazon, but we'll get a little credit for it. That's a good way to help us out while doing your regular shopping anyway. So keep sending us questions and suggestions. I'm really loving the feel of these discussions. It isn't just the four of us. It's all of us. All of you out there are participating with us. We're all friends in A Song of Ice and Fire fandom, and we're all along the ride for this crazy show Divergence
No more
Fest.
spoilers.
No more spoilers. No more leaked episodes. We are past the leaks. That's great.
Yes.
So now you can ask. Now people can not worry about spoiling us, and we won't worry about spoiling other people. Of course, we didn't look ahead, so we didn't have much to spoil people on.
No,
we did get spoiled on some things that we didn't intend to be.
Yeah.
Without watching the episode, we heard some things. It's because people told us things.
Yeah.
But together we can make sense of what we can, learn to live with what we can't, and vent about the things we can't learn to live with. So we have 6 more episodes to go this season. We're not quite at the halfway point, but I know a lot of you watchers out there feel the same way as us. So join us next week for episode 5 as we reach the halfway point in HBO's most popular show of all time. We'll commiserate once more. Thank you, Lady Gwyn and Yoke Boy of Radio Westeros. We talked about you guys' recent episode on Barristan, and Brienne is also a recent episode, but you guys also have an episode on Melisandre, which touches on some things we talked about this episode. So all y'all out there need to be checking that out.
Yeah, come and check us out at radiowesteros.com. We do these podcasts. You know, if you like History of Westeros, I think you'll like us. Come and give us a try. That's all I can say. Try us out.
Yeah.
And thanks very much for inviting us on the show again today. And I hope all your listeners and watchers are enjoying it. And I love the fact that they're participating too. This is right up my alley.
Yeah. Second.
All right. Lady Gwyn, thanks to you as well, and thanks to Ashaya as always. Thank you guys who are feeling under the weather and got to join us today. Despite that, it would have been not as good if it was just me and Lady Gwyn. I'm sure we would have done a decent job, but it's much better to have 4 of us, as well as all you listeners whose suggestions and questions have added very much to what we're able to bring to you. So thanks again, and Valar Morghulis, we will see you next week.